Hello, welcome back. If you've been here before, if not, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. This is my series called Fear Entity Exploration, based off of the Magnus Archives, which is a horror podcast written by Jonathan Sims and Alistair J. Newell. This series is going to be looking at every single entity in the Magnus Archives, exploring how they're implemented within the show. I will be analyzing 3 different episodes that I've chosen, talking about why these episodes are great showcases of that specific dread power, along with covering other elements, such as why I like the episode so much and what it does well. I've chosen these episodes based on how they, 1, impact the overall story, 2, how they portray their respective entity, and 3, based on my own personal experience, if I like them or not. I know that memorable, self-contained statements/episodes and important plot statements/episodes will be my main focus, as those are the most interesting, but there will be some wild cards here and there. I also chose these episodes based on, 4, how I ranked episodes of the Magnus Archives, using some overly complicated math that I didn't really need to, so check out my ranking videos to be familiarized with my opinions. Heavy spoilers for the entirety of the Magnus Archives, as I will be discussing these episodes with the full knowledge of 200 episodes. You have been warned. Enjoy. I already recorded 2 hours of footage, so let's do it again. Also, I have to rep one of my favorite YouTube channels, Dead Meat, with the Dead Meat video merch. Deals to die for. Dead Meat, notice me. Also, this is the last time that I'll be filming in this setup because we will be moving at the end of the month, so I don't know how my setup will be in the new apartment, but that won't change anything about this channel, so don't worry about that.
The stranger is the unknown, the uncanny.
That kind of creeping sense that something's not right. The guy you saw that might be following you might mean you harm.
The fear of the unknown. The familiar made unfamiliar. The uncanny valley. The fear of masks, of people hiding behind an artifice, of not knowing who someone is. Clowns and jesters with painted faces that cover their identity. Mannequins and dolls that look a breath away from life. Robots and automata that emulate life just a bit too well. Your identity and how it can be stripped from you. This fear of the uncanny has been talked about more with the advent of androids who look a little too human, horrible AI creations, and past random clown sightings, if you remember 2016, because I do. More positively, analog horror media such as the Mandela Catalog and Local 58 have used the Uncanny Valley to scare their viewers. And, at least in the Magnus Archives, this kind of fear is very prevalent. I could not watch a recap video about the Mandela Catalog that Wendigoon put out, let alone watch the actual videos of the Mandela Catalog. I cannot. The "have you seen this man in your dreams" face, I'm not putting that on the video, don't worry about that, but Jesus, I hate it. I would say I have a very healthy fear of the uncanny. Dolls are fine, and fearing a clown depends on the clown and the circumstances around it, and I would join the fight against our robot overlords eventually, etc., etc. Young Jeff Bridges in Tron Legacy, that was hard to watch. The Stranger in the Magnus Archives completes a sort of trinity that I've discovered in these videos. I would say that the Eye, the Web, and the Stranger are the most important fears in the Magnus Archives, from a plot standpoint, a story standpoint, and a character standpoint. I think that the Stranger succeeds more than the Eye and the Web because of its sheer size. Per my count, there are 20 episodes with statements or events that solely feature elements, aspects, or avatars of the Web, not counting overlapping episodes. If we add in overlapping episodes, it's up to nearly 30. This makes the Stranger the entity most represented, with the Flesh and the Corruption sharing second place with 15 each, and the Buried in third place with 14. The point is, the Stranger occupies a lot of space in the show, more so than most other entities. Season 1 gives us brief moments of rekindled hope, manifestations of the Stranger. The main antagonist of Season 2, the Not Sasha, is a Stranger monster. The grand majority of Season 3 is aimed towards learning about, preparing for, and stopping the unknowing, the ritual for the Stranger. The Stranger also bleeds into the narrative with the inclusions and appearances of Not Sasha, Bregan and Hope, and Nikola Orsanov into episodes that are more heavily focused on other entities in the peripheral, in after the statements or before the statements. The Stranger becomes very plot relevant in this time and then drops in representation after season 4 begins. After that, the web takes its place of importance with Annabelle Kane, go watch my web entity exploration video, and the eye continues to corrupt John while becoming very important in season 5. Go watch my eye entity exploration video. However, while episodes featuring the Stranger peter off in the latter end of the show, the consequences of its appearance still echo throughout the Magnus archives. Like I said, season 3 is very Stranger heavy, and while it still manages a good balance of other entities, there are still a lot of episodes that are Stranger focused because a lot needs to be set up for the unknowing. A lot needs to be introduced to give weight to the amazing climax. As a consequence of this, I feel like there is an oversaturation of episodes for The Stranger. There are so many episodes that it becomes almost overwhelming, and the quality varies more wildly than other entities. There are so many episodes that it becomes almost overwhelming. I will say though, the vibes of The Stranger stay being immaculate. However, some episodes feel less like a puzzle piece to the overall puzzle and more like a shaving of a puzzle piece. I will never knock a story for trying different things, and while the web had peaks and valleys and the eye was middling throughout, The Stranger has some amazing high highs, along with maybe a handful mid episodes and very few bad episodes. To me, this is better than not trying at all. It helps that many episodes are plot-focused and not isolated with the requirement to prepare for the unknowing. This helps the story progress as it feels like and is moving towards a conclusion. Some Stranger episodes do more than others, and that gives the entity of the Stranger an overall interesting texture when I look at it as a whole. I feel like I won't be able to cover much within the 3 episodes I've chosen because there is so much. I know that the 3 episodes I will touch on don't feature Not Sasha at all because her prominence is mostly in the in-between moments of season 2, so I'll cover her briefly here. Shout out to voice actress Evelyn Hewitt for imbuing her voice with malice, hidden tease, and fake innocence. She's a great antagonist, even able to fool me when I first listened to this show. I didn't realize that the voice actress has changed. The Not Them's ability to replace someone and only allow one person to realize it, to draw fear from them, is just really fun concept. Its appearances in 3 Across the Street, 77 The Kind Mother, and 78 Distant Cousin are entertaining episodes, but not among my favorite. But Not Sasha's consistent appearances through season 2 make up for the lack of amazing episodes for the Not Them. She's also important because she marks John for The Stranger, though the unknowing would have done that anyways. Elias says that hindsight is 2020. But yes, The Stranger is a beast of an entity, and it has to be to maintain its stamp on the story. The story narrows towards an important event with The Stranger, the unknowing, and its after effects ripple throughout the rest of the show, so that while The Stranger loses its importance, its impact is still felt. What I want to do is look at the 3 episodes I've chosen about The Stranger and use them to explore the things I like about The Stranger and the individual successes of the episodes. As I said before, I am making the series in ascending order from the entities I least like to most like. So, of 15, The Stranger is number 10. I'll let y'all guess which of the Dread Powers are my top 3. For The Stranger, the 3 episodes I've chosen are 87, The Uncanny Valley, 116, The Show Must Go On, and 128, Heavy Goods.
I was babbling, pleading with Megan, asking what she wanted. "I want you to meet our boss," she said lightly. I didn't know who that was, and she stared at me, skin starting to slip away from her painted-on eyes. "You may call them, I do not know you."
Case number 0141010. Sebastian Skinner incident occurred in Gwydir Forest, North Wales, September 2014. Statement given 10th of October 2014, committed to tape 4th of April 2015, released January 4th, 2018. A summary of the episode. John and Georgie argue about using a tape player to play a tape that arrives from John's mystery stalker. In it, Gertrude records and reads out Sebastian Skinner's statement, an oblivious plumber who tends not to notice things if he's not focused on it. One night he gets a call to fix a blockage and meets Megan, who acts somewhat odd. She shows him into the factory and takes him to the drainage. They make small talk while he fixes it, but doesn't pay attention to her words much. When he finishes, he leaves, noting Megan's disappointment. The next day, Megan calls him again to fix a different blockage, and in the light of the day he arrives and sees another woman there. Megan takes him into the factory and he realizes that it's an assembly line run by automata and mannequins, working on human faces. He flees and the other woman helps him get into his car, but her touch burns his arm. He manages to drive away and reports to the police that he thought he saw human remains, but a large forest fire burns away all the evidence. Gertrude's final comments talk about different things that John is confused about, but she does mention Jude Perry's name, which John latches onto. As he's talking, music from the calliope can be heard, and Georgie enters and sees his horrified face. She demands John stop investigating, as it's clearly affecting him, but he doesn't think he can stop. There are so many episodes of The Stranger that give just a small piece of the overall puzzle, and this episode gives a really, really big piece. Not only this, but it's also a Gertrude episode, so points awarded already. We begin with John and Georgie arguing about this unmarked tape. As we know now, Elias has been sending John statements to read from. Notably, the first one sent is 83 drawing a blank, which introduces Nicola Orsanoff to the story and to John himself. The second statement was 85 upon a stair, a spiral statement. Doesn't really do anything. This statement in this episode is distinct from those other statements because this one is a fully voiced tape. As before, those statements were simply just paper that John would read. This is something he can listen to. Georgie is wary of these unmarked statements being sent, seeing how John reacts to them. She tells him it's a bad idea, which he responds with saying he'll leave. This is the exact opposite thing Georgie wants, so she lets him play the tape, and it's a little manipulative on John's part. He knows Georgie wants to help, and he guilts her here. This shows how intense John feels about these statements. Gertrude begins a statement and Sebastian Skinner talks about his obliviousness. It's a funny basis as to why he didn't notice the horrors the first time he went out. It's not really pushed as much here, but there are tinges of stranger-adjacent themes. Sebastian doesn't notice what's changed unless someone points it out to him. The Stranger is all about change, so what happens when someone ignores this aspect? Would he notice if someone was replaced? Would he notice if someone didn't look quite right? But as a plumber, he doesn't need to do all that. There's no need to look at the thing as a whole or pinpoint changes or oddities. Megan's call about the blockage sends Sebastian to Whittier Forest. She calls at night, and something in her tone suggests to Sebastian that it was urgent, but he doesn't explain why. And then he meets her. She was very still when she said this and seemed to be waiting for me to respond, so I grabbed my tools and told her to show me to the plug hole. She seemed a bit taken aback by this, so I apologized, assuming I'd been a bit too crude for her, and asked her where I could find the problem drain. With the phone call and Megan's reaction to Sebastian's nonchalance, I can assume that Megan, who, yes, is Nicola Orsanoff here, just randomly cold calls people and lures them to the forest to scare them? I mean, there was an actual blockage, but was she actually expecting someone to fix it with the factory to their back? Megan was lucky, or unlucky, depending on the situation, to find one plumber who wouldn't notice her. Sebastian calls the problem drain the plug hole, which he thinks is the reason she reacted her way, and her being still, waiting for him to respond and being taken aback when he said plug hole, in hindsight, was her expecting him to react with fear, and when he didn't, she was blindsided. She takes him into the building and her arms are spread wide as if opening the door to usher spectators inside. But Sebastian, again oblivious, was focused on his tools. This is another moment of her wanting a reaction from him. I asked her again to take me to the drain and she made a rather odd noise and led me inside. Maybe she tried to scoff with her inhuman parts. This narrator is unreliable. Most of the characters in statements, the one who survived long enough to give their story to the Institute or adjacent, are pretty clear about the events they experienced. Sometimes there may be a moment or two they couldn't comprehend, which blurs how they describe it, but overall, the statements are very, very precise. It's outright stated that the presence of the archivist helps those descriptions. As we see in 100, I guess you had to be there, when people struggle with clarity when John is kidnapped, and in 134, Time of Revelation, when Adelard Decker is writing to Gertrude about how he couldn't get Delcourt to give him the description of the inheritors. Sebastian is one of the only unreliable statement givers. On top of this, it's not deliberate. He simply does not remember or realize what happened. In different stories, dialogue and actions may be summarized because they are unimportant, which also happens in this show. Usually it's unobtrusive and you don't really pay attention to it. But here it feels like a combination of this summarized dialogue and Sebastian's obliviousness. His entire statement is vague, with slight clues to Megan's motivations. This gives the prose a rich layer of interpretation, a requirement to take the knowledge of what we knew before this and what we know after this and apply it to what is happening in the present. It's a fun exercise that usually is only present in the show when talking about lore important moments. There are more details that tell the truth about the moment, details that Sebastian noticed that he reasoned away to not pay attention to them. He describes the ramshackle building, the damp metallic smell, and a dark red liquid he thinks is from chemicals. He fixes a drain, removing, quote, a big old wad of hardened fat and oil that had congealed at one of the bends. It's simply absurd that Sebastian never questions the presence of fat and oil, never connecting that to the red liquid that is pooling all around him. He also mentions keeping up small talk with Megan, again the prose employing summarized dialogue here, while still using Sebastian's point of view to obscure it. He could barely hear her over the factory work, so he simply nodded and responded noncommittally to her. He does remember her saying that she liked flensing and how she was offering to do a sculpture of him, and after looking up the definition of flensing, we can assume Megan went as far as to threaten him, but he never caught on. When he leaves, Megan reacts in a specific way. She was silent as I left and seemed as though she was trying to get over some sort of shock. He assumes she was embarrassed from being grossed out by the plumbing, and he decides to be a decent person about it and not mention it. Sebastian gives her the payment details and he leaves. Megan is shocked that Sebastian isn't scared, and I find some comedy in this, as I can imagine Nicola attempting anything to make him scared and being floored at him not blinking an eye. I'm not sure if she planned to have Sebastian killed when he arrived, but because he had no fear, he was able to leave unscathed, at least this time. Obviously, Megan found some comedy about this as well, as the next day she calls him back. Sebastian still has some difficulty arriving at the building in the forest even during the daytime. The big difference between the second day and the first is that beyond the presence of Jude Perry, the first was at night and the second was during the day. In a reversal of usual horror tropes, the horror here is delivered in the daytime, which is very fun and not that common. I mean, it's pretty common nowadays, but not usually what we see in horror. He sees Megan and Jude, who sits in a lawn chair to watch. He does notice Megan wearing some sort of bright blue and red costume like a jester or a clown, and doesn't remember if she was wearing that before. I choose to believe that she did, that she was wearing that before, but the nighttime setting helped obscure it a bit more, so it's a combination of his obliviousness and also the darkness. In the daytime, it's much easier to see. Thus, in the daytime, he can finally notice, hey, you're wearing something weird. Jude smirks cruelly at him when he arrives. I can just tell that Nicola called Jude up and said, hey, there's this chump who isn't catching on to me, come watch. Megan takes his arm, touching him for the first time, and he feels her skin. Her fingers dug into me, and they felt really, really wrong, like hard plastic wrapped in raw bacon. He reacts in horror, and Jude laughs at him. This kind of description is echoed in other episodes. The texture is evoked in 28 Skin Tight when Melanie sees Sarah staple her skin back together. In 54 Still Life, Alexander Scapelhorn hits Daniel Rawlings and he feels like he punched a sandbag. In 61 Hard Shoulder, Daisy describes Breakin and Hope's skin as feeling like rubber. This feeling of wrongness in the body is a chilling description, as it constantly uses familiar objects but with unfamiliar setups. I know what raw bacon and hard plastic feel like isolated, but wrapped around each other? Megan draws Sebastian into the factory, and then he sees the assembly line with the clarity that light brings. None of them were human. Some were wood themselves, old and stained with rot. Some were skinny, dark plastic or porcelain white. A few were cloth and hessian, stuffed to bursting and leaking sawdust from a dozen places. All of them were featureless and moved with a jerky motion like nothing I had ever seen outside of my dreams. These automata, dolls, and scarecrows are flensing human heads suspended in a frame, removing the skin. Bodies are piled off to the side. When Sebastian reacts in horror, the eyes in the faces turn to him, showing their pain and fear. Somehow, the faces are still alive despite the separation from their bodies. These descriptions help fill in the blanks of a past statement and further explains future statements. In one anglerfish, a stranger entity takes people. Notably, one of them is called Megan Shaw, implying that Nicola had taken her skin, or at least her identity. Melanie had introduced this to Sarah Baldwin, and later in '96, Return to Sender, Sarah Returns, along with another mention of Danielle Rawlings, both being the names of people taken by the anglerfish. And a few episodes later, in 118 The Masquerade, John realizes that the waxworks are alive, people skinned and made to sing in the choir. It seems like this operation that Sebastian stumbled into is the processing line for the victims of the anglerfish. Their skin is divorced from their bodies and stuffed with sawdust to make agents of the stranger like Sarah and Daniel. Their bodies are then taken to be placed into waxworks for the choir of the unknowing. This layer of supernatural torture, of eldritch pain, of a human head being removed from its body and still being kept alive is horrifying. It's a disturbing concept, but aligned with what we know about the Dread powers. They want fear. They don't always want to kill you. They'll keep you alive as long as you fear them, and usually death will find you later, if it finds you at all. Once you're dead, you can't fear anything. Megan tells Sebastian she wants him to meet their boss, the manifestation of the stranger. She says, "You may call them, I do not know you." I adore these kinds of titles for the Dread powers. I will mention them when they appear for the respective entity I am covering, but for me, this is the best name out of all of them. Of the fears I've already done videos for, the Eye is also called It Knows You, called as such in 161 Dwelling. I swear it was mentioned prior to that episode. In 161 Dwelling, it's a recording of Gertrude talking to Sasha about becoming the archivist after Gertrude's death, and there she calls the Eye beholding and it knows you. I think it was mentioned like that elsewhere, but I could not find it when I was writing this, so if you know about it, please let me know. It knows you, not as exciting to me as the strangers. These kind of alternate sentence names are used a lot in cosmic horror, and when I was doing research for this video, I couldn't really find any literature about why or where these names came from, but it feels really cool. These beings, these concepts that are hard to place, being described as sentences. I love that. I do not know you. I being the speaker, you being the nebulous antagonist. And do not know is a definite, no space for vagueness, a declaration of an eternal truth. I do not know you. Oh, I love it. At this statement, Sebastian feels dread and slams his toolbox at Megan. Her hand released my arm as I stared at her, face now twisted and hanging off the dark plastic of her head, the empty mouth moving, trying to match the vile sounds coming from the rest of her. Nicola Orsonov is an amazing antagonist. Like I said, she was first introduced at the beginning of the season, but is teased as far as 44 Tightrope, with Gregor Orsonov mentioned in tandem with Nikolai Denikin. I didn't catch it, I saw it in the wiki. A clown fighting in the circus matches the patterns of the clown doll in 24 Strange Music, which is when the Calliope is also first introduced. Beyond the moment she appears on tape, she's also described in a '96 Return to Sender that she wears a circus ringleader costume, I presume blue and red. Voice acted amazingly by Jessica Law, this doll/mannequin was created by Gregor Orsonov for The Unknowing and took his body as well, as she states in '97 We All Ignore the Pit in her first appearance. Voice acted amazingly by Jessica Law, this doll/mannequin was created by Gregor Orsonov for The Unknowing. In '97 We All Ignore the Pit, her first appearance on tape, Jessica Law delivers her threatening lines with a whimsical tilt edged with restrained madness. She likes to have fun, and it's terrifying. In Mag Commentary Retrospective number 2, Johnny states that he wrote Nicola with Jessica Law in mind, and Alex would tell Johnny that what he wrote for Nicola would be difficult to perform, but Jessica Law, Johnny knew, would be able to perform it. In 104 sneak preview, it's revealed that Joseph Grimaldi, the person usually credited with creating the modern clown, was killed by Gregor Orsanov to make Nicola. So a lot of cut sounds there. She killed Danny Stoker, which led Tim to the archives searching for answers. As she prepares for the unknowing, which I'll touch on later, she becomes more active in the story, which, combined with the stellar performance of Jessica Law, who's just an amazing voice actress, helps cement Nicola Orsanov in our minds as a memorable character. Back to the statement. Sebastian flees and is burned by Jude Perry, his arm becoming unusable. He reports about human remains to the police, but the fire burns it all down. No remains were discovered except for one thing. The closest they found was the warped and twisted frame of an old plastic mannequin. Gertrude names Jude Perry and questions her involvement. Later, in 89 Twice as Bright, check out my Desolation video, Jude confirms that Nicola asked her to cover the tracks along with other members of Lightless Flame. This implies, obviously, that Nicola and her ilk abandoned the factory. Gertrude's final comments are peppered with mentions and allusions that just go over John's head. She mentions being worried about how fast Orsanov is moving despite the disappearance of their skin, which is talking about the gorilla skin seen in 54 Still Life and is shown to be destroyed by Gertrude in 113 Breathing Room. She also alludes to recovering from something, perhaps her acquisition of the skin and subsequent killing of Daniel Rawlings, but I'm not fully sure about that. She contemplates direct measures to disrupt the ritual, which may be her thinking of 130 Meat when she blew up the last feast in 2008. She mentions how the Lightless Flame's plans have gone up in flames, pun intended by her part, alluding to 67 Burning Desire and Agnes's suicide in 2006 as orchestrated by The Web and Gertrude. All throughout, she name drops the Lightless Flame, the Unknowing, Jude Perry, and Orsanov, helping fill out small gaps in John's picture. A common occurrence in Gertrude's statements is her final line being an amazing line drop. She says, "I've been unable to contact Mr. Skinner since he gave his statement. Sad, but unsurprising. There's no doubt in my mind that when the unknowing begins, one of the dancers will be wearing his face." This line shows how practical, succinct, and almost uncaring Gertrude is. The ending of this episode is not my favorite, as John is trying to make sense of what he heard. He correctly assumes that the unknowing is a ritual, but briefly assumes that the skin Gertrude mentions is the one Mary Key gave her in 62 First Edition, which is a page from the catalog of Trapped Dead, which we eventually learn in 154 Bloody Mary that it's Eric Delano's page. John doesn't know about that yet. John latches onto Jude Perry's name, the only lead he has, before he's interrupted by music from the Calliope, which fills him with dread. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be. Is Brecon and Hope or Nicola Orsanov just driving around playing the organ? We can assume they are watching John. It seems it's just to scare John, which, is a common motive, but I can't see any further use of this moment in the plot. Maybe it is simply just to tease that the stranger agents are watching John, which we will learn in a later episode, but I'm not fully sure why this happens. This leads to Georgie discovering how scared John is due to all this, and does continue the storyline of her trying to help John turn away from the horror, but John not being able to. She finally puts her foot down, not wanting any recordings done in her home, which he agrees to. Before this, in 86 Tucked In, John turns to Melanie with help in using the Institute resources to investigate statements, and later in 88 Dig, we see Melanie searching for Jude Perry's name. After this, John goes in search of Jude, then Mike Crew, and then is able to return to the Institute. In 93 Contaminant, John breaks his promise to Georgie, leading to him and Georgie's conversation and furthering their own storylines. If the Calliope was to facilitate John and Georgie's conversation, I feel like there could have been something better to do that, so I'm not fully sure. This episode feels like a bottleneck for stranger lore, beginning the upward swing towards the unknowing. We learn more about the stranger's plans, which will be corroborated later in further episodes. It's also the introduction of I Do Not Know You into the plot fully. and also the introduction of that amazing name drop.
I curse the name of Wolfgang von Kempelen and all his vile machinery, and there is no greater hope within me than that I should never again be required to lay eyes upon the mechanical Turk.
Case number 7870212, Abraham Jensen. Incident occurred in the Court Theater, Buda, October 1787. Statement taken, journal entry dated 2nd November of that year. Committed to tape 4th October 2013. Released August 29th, 2018. Brief summary of the episode. John and the other members of the Institute are invited to Elias's office, where he plays them a tape from Gertrude. She reads a journal entry for Abraham Jensen regarding his fraught relationship with Wolfgang von Kempelen and his mechanical Turk, a machine that played chess. Jensen, being a strong chess player himself, was approached by Kempelen to work the machine, and they toured together, entertaining many until Jensen had to return to London. Years later, Jensen gets a strange invitation from the mechanical Turk to go to a show at the Court Theater in Budapest. When he arrives, the crowd is herded by automata, and he's made to sit with other captive audience members. The mechanical Turk is on stage and begins a performance, the mechanical birds placed around them crying out horribly, and the Turk dancing. Reality begins to shift as the unknowing goes underway, and Jensen struggles to understand the world around him. Eventually, an avatar of the slaughter arrives and destroys the Turk with a cannon, freeing Jensen and the audience and ending the ritual. Gertrude's final comments reflect on the odd effects from the ritual and the possible ways to disrupt it, noting that it would be difficult to pull off without being inside it. Elias warns John and the others about the unknowing's effects, and John convinces Martin to stay behind. Elias agrees despite Martin's arguments and fails to convince John to not take Tim. Later in the tunnels, John and Tim talk about the unknowing and how Tim has a strong personal connection to disrupting the ritual. This episode is my favorite of Season 3. It's my top episode. It's a comfort episode, one that I turn to every once in a while, both because of Gertrude recording and also because of the amazing writing. I know that I won't go into depth into my favorite Season 5 episode, 167 Curiosity, until much later because it's a mixture of many fears. So I'm mentioning here 165 is my favorite episode of Season 5. But yes, 116 is the best of Season 3, is among my top 5 episodes of all time. I can't wait till I get to the other top 5. This episode begins the next stretch of episodes that cover the unknowing, the ritual of the stranger, which this season has been leading towards. Another aspect that I enjoy about this episode is that it shows that the stranger is distinct from other fears by depicting 2 different attempts at a ritual. The rest of the fears only get 1 ritual described, and some don't even get any, but the stranger is special because it gets 2. This episode depicts the unknowing part 1, led by the mechanical Turk. The ritual the Institute disrupts at the end of Season 3 is the unknowing part 2, led by Nikola Orsanov. Both have overlapping structures but different applications. I prefer the first unknowing, the Turk's unknowing, more than Nikola's unknowing. Out of the 12 rituals that we learn about, web and corruption and extinction don't have rituals, and like I said, the stranger gets 2. I would rank the unknowing part 2, Nikola's ritual, at number 9. I'll share the Turk's rank later. I'll also touch on the rituals for the respective fear that I'm talking about, so I'll share their rank when I get to them. I personally prefer the descriptions and vibes of this ritual over Nikola's. I think that Nikola's being similar to a circus performance makes sense, but feels overused by now. It being stretched between 2 episodes also has it overstay its welcome. And 119 Stranger and Stranger suffers from odd pacing issues and the limitations of the medium. It was hard to understand what happened in the episode until reading the transcript, and the Magnus Archives has struggled with portraying action-heavy and plot-heavy episodes before, and in later episodes they will continue to struggle with that. Mainly, season finales tend to stretch the limitations of the medium and sometimes misses the mark. But I will say, the Rusty Quill has improved their production, and many action/plot-heavy episodes in the Magnus Protocol are much better made, more experience, and better resources. That being said, I don't like to re-listen to the 2 episodes where Nikola's unknowing takes place. 118 The Masquerade is fun because we get Martin tricking Elias and the reveal of the wax figures being the choir, but overall, The Unknowing was a strong and compelling end to the season, and it preceded a lot of big changes in the Institute and the story as a whole, But Nicola's ritual itself is not that amazing for me compared to the Turks, and it's further brought down by the flawed execution of the episodes. The Turks' ritual, and the episode as a whole, is immaculate. We begin with Elias speaking to John, Azira, Daisy, and Martin. Tim seemingly wasn't invited, and Melanie has rejected the invitation in the face of, well, 107 a matter of perspective when Elias hurt her with the visual of her father's death. Her previous attempts at murdering Elias should have been a deterrent for him to not invite her, but whatever, I guess he's just being dramatic. They discuss the plan, which Martin asks if it's viable. As I said in my Season 3 retrospective, whenever you write a story, if you want the plan to fail and the characters to think on their feet in suspenseful ways, you have to lay out the plan exactly, so that the audience is aware of what went wrong. That way, we derive enjoyment from the characters' actions despite the failure. On the other hand, if you want the plan to succeed, do not tell the audience what the plan is, so that we derive enjoyment from the characters' actions and how they surprise us, along with feeling good about the plan succeeding. Here, we know the plan is to set bombs, the same ones they found in 113 Breathing Room that were given to Gertrude by Adelard Decker. Elias wants to show them a tape from Gertrude to show what to expect from the unknowing, beginning Jensen's statement. I want to highlight the amazing writing of Johnny Sims and the amazing voice acting of Sue Sims. Some months have passed now since the sights and sounds that excite me in that unknown and hideous mania, yet still my hand shakes in the writing of it, such that I can scarce understand myself the marks I leave upon the page. My reading of that pales in comparison to Sue Sims and Gertrude. The diction and syntax of Jensen is very flowery and dated, which helps drive in the 18th century setting. Gertrude's reading also adds that extra layer of age, helping to breathe life into Jensen's words. The way that Sue Sims hits the consonants for Wolfgang von Kempelen and the mechanical Turk just hits so good. Sue Sims is really good with delivering consonant sounds. The 18th century setting is delivered very well, and I really enjoy the aesthetics presented. Jensen describes how the Turk worked, a marvel of clockwork that was actually created. I watched the Funkland's video that was about animatronics, and the Turk is mentioned among other automata created around this time, all of them nearly as horrifying as the Turk, and some even more. Jensen and the others would hide underneath the table, able to view the game, I assume, through a two-sided mirror in a way, and would be the ones actually playing the game. For, though I may have chosen the movements and played the game that unfolded above my head, the motions of the machine were the result of an ingenious array of gears and mechanisms that I could never hope to understand. It was an astounding feat of engineering, even if the mind behind it could not be replicated by clockwork and springs. Jensen then describes how strange Kempelen was himself, noting that the language barrier both harmed their communication, but helped in not having Jensen fully understand Kempelen's madness. Indeed, on some few occasions when I observed him conversing in Hungarian or German, the expressions I observed upon the faces of his interlocutors were invariably those of discomfort or alarm. Wolfgang von Kempelen had within him some strange dream, I think, some secret ambition that might be glimpsed when his eye fell upon his automata, but it always eluded me. Jensen played the machine for Empress Maria Theresa of the Holy Roman Empire, and Kempelen hired him to tour with them. Jensen describes the Turk as having rich Ottoman fur and painted eyes. The torso simply ended as it disappeared below the table, and when I held my nerve enough to climb into the tiny chamber below it, some small part of my soul cried out that I was devoured within the belly of the cruel device. This visual is distinct, and will come back later. While touring, Jensen feels anxiety and fear at looking at the Turk, and even has odd dreams about it that he does not elaborate on. Clearly, the uncanny look of the Turk made Jensen fear it, thus giving it some power. Jensen soon has to return home, and Kempelen begins working on his speaking machine, another real-life machine he worked on that attempted to imitate speech. The YouTube channel, Fabian Brachheim, has a video that shows a replica of Kempelen's speaking machine and how it sounded when he eventually finished it. Thanks, I hate it. Half of the comments in the video are Magnus fans. He finally finished working on the speaking device and died soon after in 1804. Jensen's description of it is disturbing. The bellows that aped the work of lungs, the wooden box of valves and pipes, and that most grotesque mouth he had constructed of some awful undulating substance he claimed was derived from an Indian tree. That substance being rubber. He mentions wishing to never hear the machine speak and knowing that his wish was not granted. It was 15 to 16 years since he last worked on the machine, setting the showcase to Empress Maria Theresa around the early 1770s. In 1787, he visited Austria on business and got an invitation from Kempelen, assumably, to attend a grand performance at the Court Theatre of Buda, which used to be a church. He briefly mentions the history of the theater, which I believe is simply to set the mood of the theater as being old and renovated, with the crypt serving as the trap room and cells for dressing rooms. It seems that the stranger is very interested in old theaters, as we see in 104 sneak preview, where Danny Stoker encountered Nicola Orsnoff while exploring the Covent Garden Theatre, which was built by Robert Smirke. Jensen wasn't going to go, but the invitation named him as the oldest friend of the Turk. This filled him with dread, but he thought that fear was irrational, knowing that it was an old friend that was summoning him, Kempelen. This, and learning of the new theater, makes him afraid in ways he can't understand. While waiting for the day of the performance, he attempts to meet with Kempelen again, but he can't find him, which further adds to the tension. At the theater, the first wrong thing Jensen notes is the presence of automata, mechanical ushers that guide people to their seats. He notes their faces fill him with the same dread he felt at seeing the Turk. They guide him to his seat roughly, and he sees small mechanical birds in cages in front of the rows. The description of the construction of the fake birds also feels wrong, and by now, Jensen knows that he's trapped. The preceding moments of the ritual are entrapping. The writing is beautiful, disturbing, and flowing, and I adore listening to these words. Johnny plays with expectations here, introducing elements and having them do stuff different than we would expect. The story builds, introducing more and more disturbing moments until the crescendo, almost like a performance itself. First, Jensen notes that the Turk is on stage, cloaked in shaggy and coarse fur, presumably the ancient gorilla skin. It seems to turn its head, looking at the crowd, a movement that could be controlled externally, but we know it definitely is not. Then the birds that were described to be to entertain children begin to howl discordantly. Jensen sees a Turk holding a sword, and it stabs it down into the table. Blood begins to pour out from inside it, and while Jensen doesn't fully bring attention to it, it's still evident that the Turk has someone inside the table and has killed them. We return to Jensen's anxiety about entering the Turk's table, and we connect the dots, realizing that someone was stuffed into the box, likely unwillingly. Even more disturbingly, we will never know who it was. They are not important. The Turk and the automata's movements are described as jerky, shaking and shuddering in a way that we would expect means failure or breakdown in robots. But they continue to move anyway. This combination of wrong movement along with continued and direct movement makes the automata's actions feel uncanny, even without us seeing them. They move like humans, but their body is not. Jensen's wish goes unheard as the Turk moves in its unnatural way and places something on the table. I saw a bellows, a wooden box, and a soft and hideous throat that seemed to twist and pucker on its own. This description of the speaking machine specifically adds the autonomous movement, but doesn't describe the rubber of the mouth. This speaking box is the choir portion of the unknowing combined with the birds, first detailed by Elias in 102 Nesting Instinct, noted by Gertrude in her journals without elaborating on it. As we know, Nicola's waxworks and the victims of the anglerfish are the choir for her ritual. With the knowledge of the choir, knowing about episode 87, and the still living decapitated heads that become the choir, the lack of mention of rubber, and the hideous throat that twists and puckers on its own. All of that, for me, evokes the idea that the throat is a real throat, removed from someone, still livid and perhaps feeling. Thanks, I hate it. Even if it's not that, even if it's not just like a throat that was pulled off someone, then their body is just discarded elsewhere. By itself, the autonomous movement adds a sense of terror. It should not be moving that way by itself. Also in 102 Nesting Instinct, Gertrude writes about the danseuse étoile, the star dancer that wears a skin that begins to dance. Nicola Orsnov is the dancer for her ritual, and the gorilla skin is the skin that she wants. Here, the dancer is the Turk, and the skin is the gorilla skin. Frequently, Johnny is able to write a line or two that is so mundane, yet so terrifying, so descriptive, yet so simple. This is one of my favorite moments of that.
Then the mechanical Turk did something that I do not believe will ever fully leave my thoughts, no matter how fervently I might wish it. It stood up. It had no legs, and made no secret of it, yet still it stood, stepping away from the table that was its very being, and it began to dance.
It had no legs, and made no secret of it, and then it began to dance. What does this mean? This is horrifying, having to imagine an automata dance without legs. It's insane, and this line is just amazing. It's using the audience's imagination against us. It's so good. Anytime Johnny uses our imagination to make us fear stuff without him doing anything, that is amazing. The Turk begins its dance, the bellows beginning to move, and it's speaking actual Hungarian. This jump in technology is jarring, both with the automata dancing and the bellows speaking, bringing a disturbing sense of the future, the surreal, and the impossible. When the ritual begins and the power of the stranger comes into the world, Jensen's words begin to be jumbled and inaccurate. Nothing was anything, and nobody was what they did not pretend to be. A lot of deferring imagery, the use of double negatives, attempts to make sense of the nonsense. But the chair was nothing but a stone, and his face was too much of skin not to scream. The text uses the expectations of English grammar against us to deliver the shift in reality Jensen is experiencing. It's an amazing section of surrealist writing, hard to understand but not intended to be understood. I believe Jensen accidentally kills two people in his scramble to escape and understand, but the writing is too Dadaism to understand what the fuck is happening. In a short span of time, the strange language lulls us into this uncanny and off feeling of the unknowing, until a certainty appears in this mess. Into the nothing that was everything came a thing that was most clearly a battle cry, though I did not understand the words of it, only the sense. Jensen sees a soldier, an avatar of the slaughter, and it's very cool seeing how the power of the stranger, the unknowingness, clashes against the power of the slaughter, the violence. I was sure he was a soldier, and he was nothing but a soldier. It seems like the stranger's effect slides right off of the man. He pulls two men behind him, rope around their neck and their eyes gouged out, perhaps to allow for them to move unimpeded from the effect of the unknowing. They have no eyes, so they can't question what they're seeing. I like how, to Jensen's unknowing addled mind, the bodies of the men are certain, but the things they do and the things that they hold aren't. They took the burning sun from their pockets and placed it upon the tree, and the mouth spat a curse so heavy it flew towards the altar and struck the Turk square in the chest. And then the ritual ends. The Turk is destroyed, reality back to what it should be. The crowd is left in a mess, people dead and dying all around, and Jensen somehow survived. It feels like his inability to understand the Hungarian that the bellows spoke, to understand Kemplin's fervor, gave him just enough resistance to last a bit longer. Similar to Sebastian, it was ignorance that protected from the stranger, if only for a little bit. Gertrude's final comments are not as illuminating, simply stating that the unknowing seems more hardy than the other rituals she stopped. She realizes that delaying the ritual is possible, but stopping the unknowing is harder. It has to occur as it's happening to do the most damage. The Slaughter Avatar took down the Turk at the height of its power, when it's the most vulnerable to failure. The Slaughter Avatar and his eyeless cabal joined the list of random interventions of rituals from other fears. Notable to the series 145 Infectious Doubts, with the web accidentally leading Gertrude to disrupt the Scorched Earth ritual, 53 Crusader with Those Who Sing the Night Dark Agents destroying the Eye's Cerupium, presumably a stronghold of the Eye, and 133 Dead Horse with the Hunt's inability to climax. There will be more as we continue. We already knew that the ritual had to be stopped as it happens, as Elias told John about Gertrude's plans before, so none of this is new knowledge. Gertrude places the tentative plan of disrupting the ritual as it begins as Plan B for now, until she gets more knowledge and resources. I want to note that this recording is almost a year before Gertrude records Sebastian Skinner's statement. She notes that the skin on the Turk may be the ancient gorilla skin and doesn't know where it is. By next year, she would have already found it and already destroyed it. Gertrude is awesome. Like I said, Gertrude's statements tend to end with a cool line drop. Here, she ends it with an omen. All I can say for sure is that when the unknowing begins, I certainly don't want to be inside it. This serves to show her own vulnerability and limits, and foreshadows what will happen to John and the others. Out of the 12 rituals that we learn about web and corruption and extinction, do not get rituals, and the stranger gets 2. I would rank the unknowing, the Mechanical Turk's ritual, at number 2. I adore how it's written, how it's built up. So much history is packed into one episode, so much implication is pulled from the events, and the writing and the performances are amazing. This makes this episode my favorite of Season 3 and one of my favorite rituals. To wrap it up, John summarizes it all as one long category error, and they prepare to leave. Elias hopes he's prepared John's powers to help him, which we will learn is not enough. John convinces Elias that Martin should stay behind, which he argues about, and Elias co-signs on it. John says he's adamant about bringing Tim along as well, which Elias has tried to stop, as he sees Tim as unreliable and unstable. We know from 114 Crack Foundation that Tim's been doing his own research on the unknowing, which is where we learned that Nicholas' agents had robbed Gertrude's grave and George Icarus, who is eventually revealed to be Jurgen Leitner. In lieu of the gorilla skin or John's skin, Nicola will dance in Gertrude and Jurgen's skin. Tim also confirms the location of the ritual to be the House of Wax in Great Yarmouth. John promised to have Tim included in reparation for the mess he left the Institute in while traveling and his paranoia in Season 2. Elias knows that Tim has a personal vendetta against the stranger, but John wants to use this anger to their advantage. In 117 Testament, Tim declares his use, a distraction for the stranger's agents. He and Elias both think that he'll get angry and do something stupid. Elias has Rosie, his receptionist, to book a bed and breakfast for them, and tells them to keep receipts in case they want to claim expenses, making this mission funded by the Institute and thus backed by the Eye. As stated in 150 Cul-de-sac, Melanie says we weren't even a neutral party. We did it as agents of the Eye because Elias told us to. Again, a fear interfering in another fear's ritual. Elias leaves and Basira asks if he bought it, and Martin shifts back to normal, no longer arguing about staying behind. There's been moments before where Martin and the others have formulated a plan, but we, the audience, don't know what it is. Back to what I said before, if you want a plan to succeed, do not tell the audience what it is. This is happening in these moments. The recording then cuts to John and Tim talking in the tunnels, where Tim warns him that he's going to cause as much destruction and distraction as possible, so don't get in his way. As we'll see, the overall plan begins to fail as the ritual begins, and they lose the detonator to the bombs. In the end, Tim holds the detonator and Nicola attempts to take it, but John uses his compulsion powers to ask Tim what he's holding, making him realize what it is. Tim fulfills his character arc by setting off the explosives, killing himself along with the rest of the circus, and disrupting the unknowing. Like I said, 116 The Show Must Go On begins the climax of the season, giving a warning as to what they'll encounter as the unknowing begins. The stranger has become a major driving force in the plot, and seeing a past moment of how close the stranger got to succeeding creates further stakes and obstacles. This is an amazing episode with amazing writing, important plot consequences, and a stellar performance by the Sue Sims. After the end of the unknowing, the stranger loses its prominence in the plot, but lingers just enough in season 4 to deliver something important to the story.
Even when the mannequin that now called itself Orsinov came back to us, told us we could help the world unknow and fear again the coming of strangers, still we had to drag it with us. An unclaimed package.
Case number 0180303, statement of the surviving half of the being calling itself Beacon and Hope regarding its existence. Statement extracted from subject 3rd March 2018, released February 28, 2019. Brief summary of the episode. John walks into the room with Beacon and Basira, who came to deliver the coffin to the Institute, telling them that Daisy is inside it. John pulls answers from Beacon, eventually using his powers to oust him out of the Institute, needing to write down the statement he extracted. Beacon details his and Hope's inception, going from the bubonic plague to Australia's colonization. Throughout the years, they float from one position to another, becoming conductors, transporters for auction items, and performers within the circus of the other, until finally taking the names of Beacon and Hope. They begin to deliver objects in their delivery van, and eventually they meet the owner of the coffin, and when he is taken by the coffin, it latches onto them. They joined back with Orsinov to prepare for the unknowing, and when Daisy attacked and killed Hope, Beacon threw her into the coffin. Later, Basira and John talk about it, and Basira wants to investigate. John tries to get her to trust him, but she's changed after the unknowing and tells him not to do anything stupid. I do believe that I underrated this episode prior. I believe I ranked it in the middle of the road, but I guess I was not in the right mindset for this statement. This is a lore episode detailing the ambiguous history of Beacon and Hope. We've gotten many episodes like this of an avatar talking about their beginning, but none have been written like this one. It also peppers in mentions of other entities, making this a very colorful episode while still focused on the stranger. I really like the writing here. I guess what the stranger has over the others is that some of these episodes are written amazingly. This episode is the epitome of what I mean when talking about ambiguity versus vagueness. Johnny writes this episode with the knowledge of what's come prior and the new information given to us. This allows for him to not need to outright state certain things, which creates ambiguity. We don't fully know what some things mean, but there's been enough setup prior that we can come to our own conclusions. Those imagined conclusions are scarier than what could be the truth, which is the strength of this writing and the crux of the horror here. Vagueness is the same concealing of truth without the setup to prop it up. This episode uses some really great writing techniques to deliver the horror. Ambiguous framing, echoing structure, and twin patterns. The language feels floaty, dreamlike even, and never settles onto anything specific for more than a few lines. A lot of the time, we, the audience, have to fill in the space. To begin with, we have John entering the room with Beacon and Basira. I assume that Beacon entered and found Basira, and they've just been sitting in silence until John appeared, which is a fun image. Beacon won't answer Basira's questions, but will when compelled by John, as by now, John has more control over his own powers. He asks Beacon if he's here for revenge, and when Beacon talks, there's pauses in his sentences as he anticipates Hope to continue the sentence, like he hasn't adjusted to his absence. We've seen them talk in this sort of way. In 44 Tightrope, their voices are described as seeming to shift back and forth between them, and they seem to anticipate and speak for one another when they have appeared in the past in recordings. Their fake Cockney accent is also highlighted a lot, and John even tells him to drop the accent, and Beacon just switches to a bad Russian accent. John compels Beacon to speak in his real voice, which makes Beacon laugh, saying that Nickel had mentioned that John was funny, implying that either that is his real voice, the fake Cockney accent, or there is no such thing as a real voice for a being like this, which I feel is the most appropriate for a stranger entity like him. John asks him why he's here, and he says he tossed Daisy into the pit, into the coffin, and he wants to deliver it in revenge. He lost his chance to kill John, but at least he can make them know that Daisy is suffering in there, and maybe that'll make John follow her in there. Basira gets angry and tells Beacon to leave, and when he doesn't, John reflexively acts, doing something we haven't seen before. When John's compelled someone before, there's been some soft static in the background of the tape. We can hear his compulsion. The background of the tape recording tends to fill with noise if things happen, and it tends to have a high-pitched squealing static, as the transcript puts it, when something distinct is occurring. such as in 47 The New Door when Michael appears.
Let me know once you're finished. I'd very much like you on this case.
Yes, will do.
Do you even know they're lying to you?
I'm sorry, I didn't... Can I help you? This place is off limits.
And in 108 Monologue when Peter Lucas appears.
Melanie? Tim?
Martin, isn't it?
Don't move.
It's as if their presence affects the recording, and when John compels someone, the recording registers that power. Here, the noise that occurs is distinct, different, and unique.
Get out.
Sarah,
Get out.
make me stop. What are you doing?
John, what are you doing?
What are you... Stop it. Stop it. No.
The transcript says it sounds angelic and hollow. John's doing something different, and it feels like a new avatar has appeared. Riken exclaims in pain, pleading for John to stop looking at him, and seems to be physically pushed out of the Institute. The static drops, and John pants from exertion, which seems to push the idea that this is a new ability he doesn't know how to control. He's extracted a statement. Riken's statement begins a slantwise language that makes this episode so good. It gives a statement a different voice, a different tone. As it moves, it feels like we're writing a nightmare. John reads that Riken Hope began in a plague, which I assume is supposed to be the bubonic plague. The first paragraph establishes a type of phrasing that will be echoed later. I tended the shrunken, mangy mule, and he took the remains on shoulder, slinging them onto the stinking pile. Riken says what he does, and then what Hope does. This specific sentence is not that impactful, but its structure is when it keeps repeating in later moments, making it feel a little bit more poetic. Riken describes that it isn't the fear of the plague or fear of death that they inspire, rejecting the corruption and the end. Two strangers rolling towards them, unstoppable and uncertain, wearing faces they would only half remember, bringing a fate they would beg their god to forget. They could not hate us any more than they could hate the rock that falls on them from a crumbling cliff. They did not know us, but they knew what we might do to them, what we might bring them. This concept follows them, the fear of the messenger, that sort of recalls a saying, don't shoot the messenger, the hidden arrival of something you don't want. It's noted that they never actually killed anybody in the plague, letting the plague do it for them and collecting the bodies. Their delivery was the plague itself, and people would fear them arriving. When they leave the villages, they take the faces from the dead and wear them. The idea of shifting identity is common with stranger statements, and here it's on the forefront. This statement also adds something surprising. There's a connection between them. Riken never names his other as Hope, only referring to him as he. I kept the face we chose, but I loved him for our levity. They aren't exactly the same, and they look at each other with love. Hope also repeatedly laughs, which Riken will point out with love. It's an odd and somewhat comforting relationship. These two beings look to each other with care. This relationship is mirrored in the writing as well. It's seen in those I-he statements. I tend the mule, he took the remains. It's also seen in the twin uses of the word sometimes that reoccurs in the statement. In regards to the faces Hope takes, Riken says, sometimes it fell off. Sometimes it stayed for weeks. Apart from the mirror of this relationship, the suggestion of a visual that is not described, the matter-of-factness in his words, and the uncertain time frame makes this sentence disturbing. Riken doesn't care to detail the horror, doesn't care to establish something certain. And we hate uncertainty, and that's why the horror works. Riken switches to their service on the Robert Small, a penal ship, without an easy transition, creating the feel of a dream and establishing the pattern of the story. Location, some detail, moving on. They appeared on this penal ship heading to Australia when it was deserving, dream logic choosing their vocation. The quartermaster on the ship eventually realizes what they are, using the certainty of the rations to ground that knowledge. Another I-he statement occurs. I ate the quartermaster's pen, He ate the Quartermaster's tongue. On the ship, they transported prisoners who came from Millbank Prison, which we know from 41 Too Deep was built by Robert Smirk and is underneath the Magnus Institute. Riken notes that they knew that it would be the eye's pedestal, perhaps alluding to its use in the Watcher's crown, but definitely it being the center of power for the eye. I will note that this is echoing 88 Dig, as Enrique Macmillan calls it, a hollow space that all eyes point towards. This is further setting up the reveal of the Panopticon later in the season. Riken and Hope just ignore it. On the ship, they capture a Jack before he's able to jump overboard and kill himself, delivering him to die on land. I am sure that they felt pleasure from Jack's fear as the boat sailed, delivering him to die. There's another change, and they are now conductors on an evil train. A relentless beast of iron and steam that never seemed to get you exactly where you wanted to be unless there was something dreadful waiting for you. Again, dream logic choosing their vocation. It's like the train materialized and they just were part of it. Riken says that they weren't that happy with the job because it was too much to handle and too many people survived. They begin delivering cursed objects when the web has a thrumming silk-wrapped thing on their train, and they lure an old woman to it to be killed by the web. This creates their desire to deliver objects to people. Here we can sort of assume that the web sort of pushed them into that. Riken remembers the first card that they used to deliver auction items. The I he statement reoccurs, flipped but still the same. He squeezed its first owner until they stopped and dumped them in a river. And I stayed with the second until they didn't know who they were, any more than they knew what they were. What Riken did to the second owner is left to interpretation as to the way he did this and what happened to them later, but we've seen enough Stranger episodes, Stranger Victims, to suspect that whatever happened, it was not pleasant. He also doesn't outwardly state that Hope killed the first owner, just that they stopped, which is infuriatingly unclear, and I love that. Just the use of saying that the owner stopped. It's different than died. And it feels distinct, and I like that. I also like the quick mention of a slaughter knife, Riken's favorite thing that he's delivered, which was delivered to a leering banker. This sent him on a rampage, stabbing Riken and Hope, but they were never hurt by it, and then he turns the knife on himself and stabs himself with it. Another switch, and they are now part of the circus of the other. They liked that they were with others of their own kind. Here is another one of my favorite moments of horror in the show. Again, it's a line that Johnny wrote that feels so mundane yet so terrifying, and it's a twin use of sometimes. Sometimes we lifted members of the audience. Sometimes we even put them down again. The circus of the other was shown in 44 Tightrope, with Riken and Hope briefly featuring. This first line, that they sometimes lifted members of the audience, occurs in Tightrope when they lifted Yuri Utkin. And then the second line, sometimes we even put them down again. Sometimes the audience members were never put down. It's horrifying in its implications, and it's so subtle too. We think of Yuri. What happens to those they don't put down? It feels like they were just simply sometimes plucked away. But how? This blank space of information, this ambiguous framing, is so enticing and so terrifying. We are told the truth and then told that it could be wrong. This strange logic is one of the most stranger things ever. Riken and Hope didn't like it when Gregor Orsnov began to create Nicola, thinking it was wrong to make something that is supposed to be shifting. They eventually changed their mind. We were wrong, of course, and when Orsnov carved into the thing that had once called itself Grimaldi and fed the pieces they didn't need to the shuddering organist, even we found ourselves impressed. This also recalls 24 Strange Music, as John notes that in the book that he found, it names Nikolai Denikin as the organist. This statement's shuddering organist. What does shuddering mean? I don't know. Denikin ate the unwanted body parts? I guess he did. How does this relate to the Calliope? Riken won't tell. Oh well. This line is fun. And when the faceless puppet peeled its creator and moved itself with their tendon strings, he looked at me and laughed and laughed. Great imagery here, great reaction from Hope. They ended up leaving the circus when Gertrude steals the gorilla's skin, also being exasperated with the erratic actions of Nicola. They get a lorry, which I assume is like a truck, and they begin taking passengers, bringing them fear as cargo. They begin to Uber. Here, there is a functionally similar twin use of sometimes, added with a sprinkle of ambiguous detail. In they went to the back, that silent and heavy place with boxes that seemed too big or too warm. The fuck does that mean? They usually screamed as we drove and drove, fear thick in the air, and sometimes they died. Again, there's a question of what Bregan means by all that, and there is a lack of a satisfying answer. Eventually, they get tired of this, of Ubering people around, not having a consistent goal, so they decide to quit that and they find Alfred Bregan. He alludes to the events we witnessed in 96 Return to Sender, with Alfred losing his name and then later being found dead by John. In their stint of becoming Bregan and Hope, they decided to deliver the coffin. And so he took the casket, a hungry thing of the earth, a crushing, choking tomb that will not let you die because it is too much of what it is for death to find you there, with its mocking shape buried alive. Interestingly, they say that someone like them owned it, returning to what they had talked about with the circus, but it was a fool. They begin to humanize this person who is called John. In Bregan and Hope's first appearance ever in 2 Do Not Open, John had given Joshua Gillespie the coffin. Joshua outsmarted him, and so the coffin took John. Bregan details this with the same detachment that he's had throughout the statement, but here there's a little tinge of resentment. Still, we had to drag it with us, an unclaimed package. Dream logic again, the delivery men cannot get rid of this package without a proper owner. Bregan mentions that Nikola Orsonov invited them back to help with the unknowing. Besides the random moments of them delivering or taking objects, such as in 20 Desecrated Hosts and their delivery of a pale yellow stole for Father Edwin Burroughs, Bregan and Hope are seen adjacent to important stranger artifacts. That was a clunky writing, clunky wording there. They have random moments where they just appear and take things or deliver things that are just random and not really connected to anything. Another random moment is in 93 Contaminant when they seem to take all of Greg Russell's furniture after Greg Russell is fully consumed by the purple mold. Don't know why they do that. Bregan and Hope are seen adjacent to important stranger artifacts. In 24 Strange Music, they take the Calliope away, which never really appeared again, but could be assumed that it was used in the unknowing. Maybe Nicola felt connected to it. They are also doing stuff for the unknowing, though I'm not really sure what. They are seen in 54 Still Life conversing with Daniel Rawlings, unloading something for the taxidermy shop. Perhaps more taxidermy. Overall, these moments are not important, it's just to show that the stranger is very active during this time. Bregan and Hope in 36 Taken Ill delivered the web lighter, which is not wholly connected to the unknowing, but it is very, very important. Perhaps Annabelle told them to deliver it as well. Who knows? And the web table. This table had the Not Them attached to it, as seen in 78 Distant Cousin when Adelard Decker traps it in the table. In 78, Bregan and Hope also take the table away. Then we learned in 79 Hide and Seek that the Not Sasha, as we know a stranger monster, had its friends, presumably Bregan and Hope, to ferry it around to scare people, and was tasked by presumably Nicola to spy on the Institute. Bregan and Hope's featureless prints are all over this show early on. Finally, Bregan reiterates how he shoved Daisy into the coffin after she killed Hope, hating her for tearing them apart. I have never known hate before. I have never known loss. But now they are with me always, and I desire nothing but to share them with you. He describes the coffin in very compelling, terrifying ways, but I'll save that for when I talk about the burial. Overall, the writing here is hypnotizing, circular, and it feels like we're experiencing a nightmare. I wish the writing was a bit more structured, a bit more symmetrical, but as is, there is some sort of uneasy balance in language that I think adds some tension to the story. I would have preferred a little bit more repetitive structure, but that's fine. This concludes his statement, but not the story of Bregan. Eventually, Bregan will reappear in 182 Wellbeing, stuck in the London incursion as an unassuming janitor in St. Bleeding's Center for Wellbeing. He's lost his way, recalling his despondency at being without hope. I am without him now. I am. I can feel myself fading, weak, no reason to move, nothing to deliver. Insane bleedings, he'll plead for John to kill him, and John will reluctantly oblige. After this statement, John is still a little shaky, weak from his exertion of power, and turns the tape off, and we return to him and Basira discussing what he learned. Daisy is still alive in the coffin. John confirms that all of the circus perished in the unknowing, or at least Breakin believes that, so at least putting a nail in the coffin for the stranger and its ilk. And there has not been any information past that suggests otherwise. Basira says that she's going to investigate and tells John not to know what she's doing. John asserts that she can trust him, but Basira pushes back. She explains to him how she survived the unknowing's effects, that which drove Jensen insane, and was able to reason herself out. After that, with Tim dead, Daisy gone, John in a coma, Peter in charge and never meeting him, Melanie fucking crazy, Basira turned inwards. I can trust me, John. That's it. While bothersome, Basira's reaction to the aftermath of the unknowing is understandable. As I said, the unknowing changes a lot. Early season 4 feels nearly empty, with Basira alone with a raging Melanie and an isolated Martin. This change is significant considering how many characters we had in season 3, and could not have happened without the impending doom of Nicola Orsanov's dance. Finally, Basira tells John not to know what she's doing and not to open the coffin, to which John responds with a joke saying it was addressed to him, so he is now the owner of it, so he can do what he wants. This episode begins a small arc of the coffin, which would lead John to be marked by the flesh and the buried. Breakin and Hope have affected a lot of the plot prior, for example, the web table, the web lighter, and their final delivery pushes things closer to the conclusion. 2 more marks on John. These nearly ubiquitous stranger beings barely survived the end of the stranger's dominance, and while the rest of the show will not focus on them or Orsanov, the stranger has made its mark. Final thoughts. These 3 episodes I like for different reasons. 87, The Uncanny Valley, establishes the themes, motifs, agents, and plans for the stranger, an important episode that sets up the problem that the stranger is going to be. 116, The Show Must Go On, showcases one of the 2 rituals shown for the stranger, has amazing descriptions and terrifying moments, and is performed beautifully. 128, Heavy Goods, details the beginning of popular antagonists, reads like a nightmare, and caps off the end of the stranger's storyline. I'll rank the episodes from best to least best, 116, 128, 87. I definitely underrate Heavy Goods in my season 4 ranking because the writing is just really good, and I could not appreciate that back then. Like I said, The Stranger has oversaturated the narrative, but it makes up for it in strong stakes and an impactful legacy. It's carried by not Sasha, Breakin and Hope, and Nicola Orsanov. 4 charismatic and compelling characters that many people enjoy. There are so many episodes for The Stranger that it feels like the whole story is focused on it, but in reality, it's only really that big in a season and a half. It's a popular entity for a reason, and it manages to hold up. The show begins with 3 episodes of The Stranger asterisk, and slowly builds from those foundations towards the unknowing in an intriguing way. Asterisk, 2 do not open features Breakin and Hope, but the horror is focused on the coffin, buried, not stranger, but like anglerfish, Breakin and Hope, not them. Like, come on. It may at times overshadow other entities, what with not Sasha and Breakin Hope appearing in episodes and stealing attention away. However, it manages to contain a cohesion with the other entities so it doesn't feel like an outlier. The eye and the web also make themselves feel important, but in their execution they seem to step away from the other entities. The Stranger, for lack of a better term, maintains its identity as a strong antagonist and a dread power. I really enjoy how The Stranger is implemented within the show. I would have liked to see a handful more standalone episodes, because many of the episodes for The Stranger at first feel standalone until further episodes connect them to a larger story. The few standalone episodes we do get aren't my favorite, and in the overall scheme of the show, standalone episodes have to be amazing to stand out. We're transitioning into more and more positively viewed fear entities, And I have very little to say about The Stranger besides, whoa, that's a lot of coverage. Can I also get some isolated episodes? Of the other episodes of The Stranger in order of my most favorite to least favorite, One Anglerfish is a great introductory episode and feels like an isolated episode until much, much later. I like the vibe here a lot. 118 The Masquerade begins the attempt at thwarting the unknowing along with Martin's plan against Elias. 3 Across the Street is fun, the Not Them's first appearance. It's fun that most of OG Graham's weird things are never explained, and does set up the web table as well. 28 Skin Tight, great episode introducing Melanie King and setting up Sarah Baldwin. The atmosphere in this episode is also great, but it's a bit too vague about the hospital haunting. Like, what was this slaughter ghost there? What was that? 77 The Kind Mother is a great Gertrude episode where she is the most uncaring bitch ever. And the Not Them here is the scariest for me in this episode, where she's the Not Rose. 78 Distant Cousin is Adelard Decker's first appearance, Stan Adelard Decker, but otherwise is a repeat of Kind Mother. We have Web Table Full Circle Moment, Not Sasha's attack on the Institute, along with Michael Distortion's appearance. That's all really fun. 54 Still Life has a fun location, the taxidermy shop, and I wish we would have returned to this shop a handful of times more. And the introduction of the gorilla skin is really important to the story. Daniel Rawlings could have hit better. Alexander Scapplehorn is a cool-ass name. The anglerfish was wacky but still creepy, and Riken and Hope were there. 24 Strange Music has great rhythm but is a bit too vague about what is occurring. The Calliope doesn't really have a payoff, which I've been alluding to. And this episode is only memorable to me because it's Sasha's first appearance on tape pronouncing Calliope. 119 Stranger and Stranger suffers from stretching the limitations of the medium of audio drama, but still delivers a terrifying, confusing, exhilarating, and satisfying conclusion and climax to season 3. Clarity is key. There wasn't that much here. Yes, we're still going. I told you there was a lot of episodes. 34 Anatomy Class. I just don't like that much. It's well written and creepy. It is a different take and idea that I can appreciate. However, it takes me out that the school system was so bad and no one mentioned anything about the placeholder names like John Doe. Hello? It's almost standalone as well, discounting the brief moments with Max Musterman, but it's just the school system just takes me out of it. 83 Drawing a Blank is fine. I think creepy mannequins could be executed easier, but the ending is really scary and the implications are fun with Lana Billings being skinned. I just needed more from this episode. 44 Tightrope is the first Gertrude episode, but doesn't really reveal or share anything. It's written to be that way, and anything that we can pull from this episode is retroactive, like I did in this video. 79 Hide and Seek. The climax for season 2 has a lot of moving parts that don't really mix well, same as 119. Not Sasha and John's flight into the tunnels, while appropriate for the story because the tunnels were a big focus in season 2, the tunnels just feel like a different location altogether. When John's hiding and stuff, it feels like a much larger space with more space to run in, while in the prior moments, the tunnels felt like one singular labyrinth versus a maze. You know what I mean? Hi, Editing David here. Somehow, I forgot episode 165 Revolutions. That episode doesn't really do it for me. It's too flowery of a language to try to pay attention to, but at least we get Not Sasha's death, which was really fun. 104 Sneak Preview should be an important episode for me because it details Tim's backstory, fills in blanks for Nikola Orsonov, and has some great horror, but for some reason, it's just sort of forgettable for me. I had my Excel sheet up, and I was looking at the episodes, and I was like, oh, 54, Still Life, just remembered off the top of my head. I was like, I know this one, I know that one, and I got to 104, and I was like, what episode is this? What happened here? It's just not memorable for me. It doesn't have a wow factor for me to really enjoy it, and also there's nothing that I dislike about it. It's just forgettable. 96 Return to Sender could have been an email. Alfred Brecken was a nothing character, but the events around the statement is pretty fine. And finally, 0122 Zombie is the only true standalone episode for The Stranger, and a dubious one at that. It does have some interesting psychological horror, but overall it feels too disconnected even from the Dread Powers themselves. and I don't enjoy it that much. Overall, these are mine own opinions, so I would love to hear what you think about The Stranger. Let me know why you like The Stranger, which episodes are your favorite, or what scares you about The Stranger. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with your friends. I'd love to hear some feedback about y'all, about my videos and my channel. Also, let me know, because when I move, I will record a new intro for this series. I don't know if it's still needed or not. Let me know if you think that the intro is a good idea or not, because I made it for like people who are coming in for like the first time, but I feel like it's a little bit more understandable as to what's happening, but I think an intro might help. I'm not sure. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Thank you again so very much for watching. Don't forget to be passionate, and I'll see you later.